Good afternoon. I'm Juliane Campfield, the director of Deutsches Haus at NYU. Welcome to our first ever virtual event, Germany, Corona, and the State of Exception, a moderated discussion among Christiane Lemke, Claus Leggewie, and Christian Martin, which Deutsches Haus at NYU is delighted to co-present with our wonderful partner at NYU, the Center for European and Mediterranean Studies. I would like to extend heartfelt thanks to Christian Martin, our amazing co-organizer, my fantastic colleagues, Zara, Christian, Hotaka, and Sabrina for working tirelessly behind the scenes to make this possible, and our fantastically helpful NYU Gallatin NYU colleague, Jennifer Birch, who guided us through the Zoom webinar process and kindly spent a lot of time with us doing so. Thank you, Jen. I'd also like to thank the DAAD, the German Academic Exchange Service, for continuously providing us with support for our academic programs. We're extremely grateful to them. Last but not least, I would briefly mention the German language classes at Deutsches Haus at NYU, which you now can take remotely. So consider that option. Our summer term will open shortly. But now back to our event topic. Like elsewhere, public life in Germany has been shut down since mid-March. Now the country is trying to reopen parts of its economy, although the Oktoberfest, as you probably heard, was canceled for the fall. In this panel discussion, we will take stock of how Germany is faring during the coronavirus outbreak and relate the current crisis to the more general topic of the state of exception. Let me introduce our distinguished speakers, and I will start with Christiane Lemke. Christiane Lemke is a professor of international relations and European studies at Leibniz Universität Hannover in Germany. She received her PhD from the Free University in Berlin and went on to earn her Habilitation venia legendi in political science from the same institution. Her research interests include the creation of norms and customs in global governance. She has been visiting Krupp Chair at Harvard University, DAAD Professor at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, and Distinguished Visiting Professor at Suffolk University. In addition, while on leave from Leibniz University Hannover from 2006 to 2007, she served as Director of State Parliament in Lower Saxony, Germany. From 2010 to 2014, she was the holder of the Max Weber Chair in German and European Studies at NYU. Claus Leggewie holds the Ludwig Boerne Professorship at the University of Giessen, Germany. Until recently, he was the director of the Institute for Advanced Studies in the Humanities, KWI, in Essen. From 1995 till 1998, he was the first incumbent of the Max Weber Chair at NYU, where he also received the Volkmar and Marit Sander Prize in 2016. His most recent book is Jetzt Opposition, Protest, Widerstand, now Opposition, Protest, Resistance. Moving on to Christian Martin, who will moderate the conversation. Christian is a professor of political science at the University of Kiel, Germany. He currently holds the Max Weber Chair in German and European Studies at NYU. In his research, Christian is mainly interested in the politics of globalization, the electoral success of the far-right AfD, and the demise of social democracy. As you all will have noticed, our speakers either currently are or have been our Max Weber Chair professors at NYU, and it's wonderful that we're all still connected with the previous chairs and that it's such a continuous and fruitful relationship. Thank you all so much. Thank you, esteemed attendees, for spending your time with us this afternoon and evening, and I hope you join this discussion. And I'm now handing things over to Christian Martin. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Juliane. Thank you everyone at Deutsches Haus, and thank you Christiana and Claus for joining us tonight, German time, this late afternoon here in New York, for a discussion that is timely, obviously. The pandemic is global, and as a global pandemic, it has impacted Germany. It has also impacted the United States. And one thing that I thought interesting in putting together this, this discussion is to draw a comparison between the two cases. But it also goes, when we think about the German reaction, beyond that. There is a infamous German tradition in thinking about the state of exception. And this tradition is, of course, connected to the name of Carl Schmitt, who in his political theology in the interwar period wrote a great deal about the state of exception. And so this is the broader context in political theory in which I would like to place this discussion, which we will come back to in the discussion after our initial presentations. And we have said that Claus will go first with his remarks, and then Christiane, then I will ask a few questions, and then we hand things over to the audience. So Claus, why don't you take over and tell us a little bit about what's going on in Germany?
Okay. Thank you very much for inviting me and organizing this wonderful webinar that pulls me out of my isolation in my home office for a moment. I would like to be in New York in person, but this is also a very nice experience now. Can you hear me? Is everything fine?
Yes.
Hopefully. All right. Well, a couple of days ago, a friend of mine from New York wrote me a mail from exile in Vermont, actually. And she said, you're in the best country to live in. Well, living in this country, I see the flip sides of the German exception too. Well, I'm not talking, if we have, do we have the PowerPoint right now? I'm not sure whether you can see. All right, so I will go to, let me check. Can you please start the, all right, here we are. Thank you. Maybe next, here you see what Germans are worried about. It's not only the Oktoberfest, it's also the cancellation of soccer games, which is very much debated right now, as club managers ask for the permission to finish the season and to continue the plays without spectators and fans to get their money from TV rights. Well, this is of minor importance, of course, to contextualize the German situation. Let us start with some more serious numbers. Here we are. According to Johns Hopkins University, which is quoted now in German TV every day, at least twice or three times a day, the first detected case of COVID-19 happened to be in Bavaria on January 28, mostly young people coming back from their skiing vacations in the Alps. Germany has now officially around 160,000 infected people. And there is, of course, over-mortality in Germany, as we call the death rates compared to normal, including influenza years. But the infamous reproductive rate, the R rate, is currently below 1, which is a quite good thing. Here in the slide, you see the situation as of yesterday, and you can see the differences between some major Western countries. For example, and this is the most important thing, the ratio of confirmed death per 1 million inhabitants is extraordinarily low in Germany, lower than in the United States and lower than in Italy, Spain, and France. You see this deaths per 1 million population in the second column, which is 79 compared to 161 in the United States, and 490.2 in Spain, and very extraordinarily high in Belgium with 621.1 people. And other data also show a rather good picture for Germany. Under other circumstances, this tableau would give us a nice opportunity for comparison. We are in a once-in-a-lifetime situation and a life experiment in an absolutely unprecedented situation, of course. As you see, some countries quickly implemented pandemic response plans, helping them to significantly limit the spread of the coronavirus disease. And others failed to act early, particularly Russia and other countries, and the health systems have been overwhelmed with patients. In some cases, the decisions by federal and local leaders aimed at halting community spread, such as travel bans and lockdowns, which we're in right now. And that has made a difference in keeping outbreaks manageable. This is the main topic in Germany, keep it manageable. And despite ranking among the top global spenders on healthcare, the US system has struggled in its response much more, as you know. There is much speculation about the reasons for the relative stability in Germany, and it may have been because of early testing, relatively well-equipped and advanced healthcare system, some early and unanimous political reactions from the beginning. As Germany has been testing far more people than most nations, it catches more people with few or no symptoms, increasing the number of known cases, but not the number of fatalities. And there is a very strong intensive care system too. Furthermore, we had a broad consideration of scientific and medical expertise, high public trust, a wide public consensus on partial lockdown until now. Here, the German strategy ranges in the midfield between Sweden and the Netherlands on the one hand, and Italy, Spain, and France with their total lockdowns on the other hand. There were no catastrophic hotspots in nursery homes and banlieues. There's until now no rebellion, but my feeling is, and I think this is important, that we have reached tipping point. There is a semantic change regarding elder people when they, people over 60 like me, were coined a general risk group. That meant in the first place that they carried a risk to become infected, that they were victims, potential victims of this disease. Meanwhile, they are seen more as a risk for the German economy. And here you see a protest of restaurant owners in Brandenburg, before the Brandenburg Gate in Berlin. Sorry, this is the picture I wanted you to show. So opening up restaurants and bars is one of the major concerns in Germany now. Question is this a systemic advantage or was it sheer good luck? I don't know, and everything may change within a few weeks. Here we see a snapshot from a clinic in Giessen, where you can identify our Minister of Public Health and at the left, and the Prime Minister of the Land of Hessen in a densely packed elevator. It's not too exemplary as a behavior, I guess. And here are the most critical points I would like to raise. While there is much talk about the systemic relevance of the economy, there is rather a neglect of the family situation after the lockdowns of kindergartens and schools. How do they manage the situation, in particular single parents and single moms and families in cramped apartments with no balcony, garden, digital equipment, etc. And there was another important missing point, that after the closing of the borders, the almost total omission of refugees at the Dublin and Schengen borders, we celebrated ourselves to have accepted around 40 to 50 unaccompanied kids from the camps of the Greek islands, but we were eager to welcome about 1,300 seasonal workers from Romania to dig up our asparagus. The semantic failures being one, the neglect of the family system, and two, the migration system or the global south in general. The hit parade with our well-working healthcare system is heavily overshadowed by those two major flaws where we show no solidarity at all. Let me say some words as a social scientist. I have to admit that our voices are rather low now in Germany. Absolute priority is give scientists, in particular biologists, playing a rather good role. They clearly weigh their advices, they argue in a decent manner for better and best solutions to a broader public and never promise us rose gardens. And this is, by the way, a service to the rehabilitation of science, disqualified in recent years because of the anti-scientific and anti-intellectual wave. See the opponents of vaccination, see the climate change denial, see the whole fake news propaganda. Negationists and conspirationists are still there. We will talk about it, I think, later, but not as important as in other countries or in places like Ohio. There was and is some confusion about the variety of measures due to our federalist system and to unequal distribution of the virus. And in my opinion, as we are all driving on sight, this is the pet word of our chancellor, we have a very limited and fruitful competition between institutions in the different lender states of Germany. Uncertainty grows now whether a second wave threatens after loosening the physical distancing and the partial opening of shops, schools, and other places. My university, for example, is closed until further notice. My daughter's school for another week or two, and my wife is working with a normal schedule. All in all, to sum up, we have a robust healthcare system, a rather appropriate crisis management, a rational decision-making at the highest level of government, combined with the trust the government enjoys in the relation. And by the way, the struggle for power is not over. The choice of a leader of Christian Democrats has been postponed, but is played out now in the competitive crisis management of the pretender teams. Laschet and Spahn in North Rhine-Westphalia with a more liberal approach versus Merz, who was tested positively and has survived it, and now as a newcomer, Prime Minister Söder of Bavaria. Question is, of course, is this the hour of the executive? Is there some democratic backsliding? Is there a tendency towards authoritarian rule? I think until now, not at all. All the measures that were proclaimed by the executive are very well substantiated, they're reasonable, and there is always a time limit. Nevertheless, we have to see how we can kind of go back to a solid democratic rule. Let me finish 2 lessons for post-corona, or what we call the new normality now in Germany. Lesson number 1 is to strengthen our healthcare system, reduce dependencies in vital branches and services of general interest, moderate globalization, but not international cooperation, and reform public service. There should be no further privatization of vital infrastructures, for example, education, collective transportation, vital resources like water, even the digital sphere is concerned. And that means, all in all, bring the state back in. And lesson number 2, from Corona crisis, there will be no way back to December 2019. The old normality, it is the end of the world as we knew it. And we will only survive climate change, a much more dangerous thing than the coronavirus, by drastically changing lifestyles, production ways, mobility patterns, urban planning, and all the rest. And there is some hope today. We had a Petersburg dialogue today with the government and business people, and there was a strong commitment, self-commitment of these business people to fulfill the goals of the Paris Climate Summit. So thanks for the moment. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Klaus. I would now hand things over to Christiana.
Okay. Yes. Yeah, I'm very, very happy to be here, and I would like to thank Juliane for organizing this event. And in times where we feel more isolated as scholars, I'm in my home office right now. I think it's important that we keep this transatlantic dialogue going, that we practice the international approach in social science and in science in general. So I'm very happy to be here. I would like to show a few slides. If I can see these slides, that would be great. Okay. All right. Claus has already alluded to the German case being an exceptional case in certain ways, meaning that we have comparatively few people who died of COVID-19. We have in the European context, of course, the Southern European countries, Spain and Italy, with very, very severe problems, but also small countries like Belgium and Switzerland have seen more people dying from the coronavirus than Germany. And that has often caused a debate about what is special about Germany, and Claus has elaborated on that very nicely. I was in the US early in March to do research, and I was called back by my university because of the general lockdown in Germany. And I caught the last flight from Newark to Berlin, the last regular flight. So I have been in my home office ever since. My university is changed to online teaching like most schools until the end of the summer semester. So I had some time to look at some charts. And what is so striking is the difference between the United States and Germany. Here you see the new cases reported day by day, which is a certain measurement to say, have we been able to flatten the curve, as they say, meaning, slow down the infection rate per day, the number of people, one person who is infected might spread to others. And it is very clear that the German curve is not only flattened, but numbers are reducing. We have now 1,000 people per day reported, which has significantly decreased. But the goal is, according to scientists and the health minister, to reduce the number to maybe a couple of hundred, 100, 200 per day. Only then we learn we can go back to some kind of normality. The other interesting feature is that this is, the federal states, that there are vast differences within Germany. And this federal system also shows in regards to lifting some of the restrictions that we have seen. Today, all states have moved to a policy that we have to wear masks when we go into a store, but several stores are now open. The states are going back to a policy of letting children come back to school, and particularly the older children who are just about to graduate either from 10th grade or from the high school. So that there's a great variety in Germany in terms of the policies and the measures. I would like to point out a couple of thoughts, a couple of features that are quite striking in this unusual moment in time. We've seen the best and the worst in our society. The best and the worst in several areas. There is still social isolation. I have not seen my children who live 10 minutes away, who are adults, since March 22nd, when the lockdown started. There is social isolation still in place, but at the same time, we see a lot of community support. We see neighbors reaching out to neighbors, a lot of initiatives helping elderly people or groups are at risk, helping families at need of food. So here in Berlin, you can see both of these tendencies. A lot of concern about the social isolation, the psychological impact, the social impact on children and on families, and people who live in single households, which is quite a large number in Berlin. On the other hand, the community support. In terms of Berlin's outstanding feature, culture, all the theaters are closed. We have 3 opera houses, all of them are closed, of course, and there is no expectation that they will reopen soon. On the other hand, we've seen some great internet performances of artists, house music, you know, people making music at home, and you can watch it on the internet. I saw Global Citizens, the concert, and it was great, you know, to use these tools of the internet to see international artists. So we don't quite know how we will get out of this situation, and Claus already alluded to the discussion about careful opening. We will not return to normal. We will not return to the stage we were in December and January. So it will be different. The third area I would like to point out in terms of the best and the worst in science. This is a very deliberate moment for science, social science, but more so all the experts in the medical field who are teaching us a number of things. They do not agree on everything, which I find very interesting. There is not one opinion we follow, but there is a deliberation. And that is actually what we really enjoy seeing in science, that there are different viewpoints and opinions. On the other hand, we also have a rise in conspiracy theories. We have a rise in all kinds of very strange theories about viruses not being existent, or theories about immunization and opposition to immunization, and so on and so on. So this comes out more clearly in this situation of stress and uncertainty. And the last point is economic hardships. I mean, there is no question that Germany, just like the United States, is facing a deep recession. We know that unemployment will rise, and the estimates are in Germany 4 million by the end of this year. This is, of course, very small compared to the 26 million unemployed in the US right now, but it is still a very concerning development for a country that is so reliant on exports, on an economy that keeps going. The economic development will actually decline by 4.2%. We have short-term work, which is why the unemployment rate is lower, but short-term work means less income. So there are a number of families who cannot pay rent, who are very concerned about the future, of course. So that is a big issue, the worst, the recession. But maybe something more positive may come out of this, that we rethink how we organize the economy. A lot of branches are now calling for the state to step in to give subsidies, but there's also a very interesting discussion about the switch to new technologies, climate-friendly technologies, the digitalization, which has been kind of slow in German schools, but also in the universities. I mean, there are a lot of very interesting kind of innovative fields that we can look at. So I would like to end with these brief remarks. I might also point out that the government has very high approval rates. 90% of Germans think the government is doing a good job. And it has strengthened the Grand Coalition, the Social Democratic, Christian Democratic Coalition, which about 3 or 4 months ago was in a big disarray. It was not clear how long it would last, but right now decisions are made on a very broad basis of consensus and a very high legitimacy of decisions that the government makes. So this is a very interesting situation, how the crisis affects the government. Thank you.
Thank you, Christiana. Let me start my video. Claus, can you start your video as well so everybody can see, yes, the panelists. Thank you so much, Claus and Christiana. That was really interesting. It's one thing to read about what's going on in Germany, and quite a different thing to hear about it from people who are there more or less on the ground. Now, one of the things I've read in the New York Times was exactly an article addressing the question, why is Germany doing so relatively well? And one of the factors that this article, among there were 4 factors, and they all have been addressed in one way or another. But most importantly, the article wondered about why there is so much acquiescence on the part of the German population to government decision making. And this indeed is interesting from an American perspective, because what we have been seen from the very start of this crisis is a high degree of discontent in certain parts of the country, in certain subsets of the population, with the decisions being taken by state or local governments. Could either of you, or maybe both of you, address this difference and point to possible causes? Why is there relatively homogeneous response on the part of the German population to the measures? People are in general happy with it, or not happy, but they do what they think they have to do. While in the US, we see a much more polarized response. Christiane, you go first.
Yes, a couple of points. I mean, first of all, what you notice is that the German government tried to explain each step on the way. As early as mid-March, Angela Merkel said this is a very serious situation. The health minister was constantly explaining why it is necessary to do this and why is it necessary to have the social distancing. So very different from 2015 during the refugee crisis, where the government, and particularly Angela Merkel, did not do a good job explaining why she made a decision she made, which was certainly, a good decision from a human rights perspective and from an ethical point of view, but it was not very well explained to the population. So people were criticizing her. The AfD kind of shot up in support. Now, this time, I think the government tried very carefully to explain each step, and still is trying to, set dates when they will reevaluate the situation. Such a date is coming up on April 30th, and then in May, and so we constantly have the information and a process of legitimizing each step. In the US, I noticed that it's a very polarized society already before the crisis occurred, and it has never been so polarized. And President Trump, unfortunately, was not able to build bridges. He was actually deepening the ditches. And I think in such a highly polarized situation, it is more difficult to find policy measures that are, you know, respected by the citizens. I don't think we are obedient citizens. I don't think it's the old German authoritarianism, right? I mean, that's always the idea. Germans always listen to authorities, you know, and but that is, interestingly enough, there are still a lot of debates going on, and appeals to people's, you know, rationality and to people's responsibility in particular. You want to be responsible, so you wear a mask. Even if it's controversial, you know, to what extent it helps, but it signals to the others, I respect you, right? And so it's much more an issue of mutual respect, and also of people making this decision. I'm not sure how long the patience that people show, I mean, people are tremendously patient, how long this patience can last if the economy really goes down the drain. Right now, we are still kind of doing pretty well. So the political economy of patience would be a very interesting kind of future feature to observe.
Claus, do you want to add on to that?
Yes. Thank you. I completely agree with the description of the situation. I would like to add 2 points. Number one is, in 2015, it was about the others, and now it's about ourselves. This is a huge difference. We are very consensual about keeping us alive, keeping us healthy, etc., etc. So there's a kind of internal solidarity, and that works very well on the basis of a established consensus. We don't have this polarization in the political system. We have almost a depolarized situation. And the second point I would like to make is about, the flip side, as I said. This is very much based on economic rationality. And there is a certain tendency to play out, you know, economic reasons against, more ethical reasons about survival. So what we have now in Germany is a kind of generational contract between the elder and the younger people. We elder people demand some patience and some solidarity from young people. And I remember, like a couple of months ago, when there was a discussion about, what did the baby boomers and the generation before, the 68ers, do for us in terms of climate change, etc., etc. So I think to keep this patience and to keep this solidarity on a high level, it's absolutely necessary to show younger people that now we will give back. So in particular, elder people have to practice a new kind of lifestyle. They have to open up for measures in terms of climate protection, etc. And I think this is very important now, to refound this generational contract. And that brings the Green Party in. They have become very important last months. The decline of the Social Democrats was accompanied by a major advance of the Green Party. And I think next to the problem that mostly in these times, in crisis times, governments at certain advantage compared to opposition parties, they have to play a role, or will find back to its role, if it exactly formulates the way to get out of the Corona crisis and to face the climate protection issue right now. I think this is the important, if you like, historical mission of the Green Party and of the ecological environmental movement worldwide, to exactly show that Green New Deal is now very necessary, and it's feasible, and it works, and we can go from A to B, not without difficulties, not very easily, but we can do this. And I was alluding to this meeting today, the Petersburg meeting between the government and big business, which includes the car industries, etc. So very traditional and emission-intensive industries. And they all agreed about the Paris Climate Agreement. They are not using the situation to loosen the environmental protection regulations. And I think this is quite important, that to find a way out of not back to old normality, but to find a way to this new normality and to show that there is something in it for younger people.
Claus, you mentioned a depolarization of German politics, and indeed, if we look at the polls, it's remarkable how much the CDU has increased in support. They are now polling at around 37–38%. I mean, that's basically unheard of for the last 3 years, whereas the AfD, as an anti-system party, party of protest, is polling below 10%. Again, something that we have not seen in over 3 years. Why is that? Is that because one party is in the opposition, the AfD, and the other party is in government, and you know, the government enjoys this increase in support because they are the government and can react to the crisis, or is something else going on? Is this connected to what Claus has alluded to in his presentation, a return to reason, more reliance on science, on argument, on deliberation, or what is going on?
Well, I think there's an interesting East-West divide, not just in Germany, but also in Europe. In West Germany, AfD is going down. In East Germany, it's stable. It's still around 20% or even 23% in Saxonia, and in one of the Länder which have elections next year. So there is still a divide, and this is even getting deeper now. The cleavage is deeper now. And this is also true for Europe in general. If you look at the Italian and French populists, or as I would say, Völkisch authoritarian nationalists, they are kind of weaker now than before, whereas in East Germany, Poland, Hungary, the right wing is very strong. So I think here we have a East-West divide, which is not, we have not overcome this East-West divide. And I think this is a tremendous challenge for Europe in general. Europe is at risk now. All the measures we're talking about are mostly taken on a national level. The nation state is the central agent, and we exactly know that neither the pandemic nor the climate crisis can be solved on a national level. National states have to cooperate, and here is the challenge for Europe in general. And I think the EU Commission with Ursula von der Leyen and Franz Timmermans are doing a quite good job in reminding us that there is this idea of a Green New Deal for Europe too.
Well, let me maybe ask a little bit more about Europe. We're not seeing only an East-West divide, but also a North-South divide that has already been felt during the European sovereign debt crisis. And back then there was talk about Euro bonds. Now they are back as Corona bonds, some degree of commonly denominated debt in order to help the most severely hit countries in the south of the Eurozone. But you know, the resistance, especially from Germany and the Netherlands, but also from Finland, is quite stiff. So while there has been agreement on help from the ESM and from the European Central Bank, as yet there is no agreement on commonly denominated debt. Is that, Christiane, something that should concern us with respect to the future of the European Union? Do we need Corona bonds?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, first of all, I do agree with you, Christian, that there's also a North-South divide, and the same kind of cleavages we saw during the financial crisis, the Eurozone crisis, are now, you know, visible again, and even more visible between the North and the South than I would say between the West and the East. And the Southern European countries were hit hardest by the Corona crisis. Why? One of the reasons clearly is that the financial crisis was only solved by introducing austerity measures and by forcing the countries to cut back public services, including healthcare, so that the healthcare system was not in good shape in Spain and in Italy when the corona crisis hit. I think that the European Union has done more than you would think, looking at it from the outside. I mean, a lot of people have said, oh, look at the EU, it's totally useless, they can't agree. And here's Germany again blocking the Eurobonds and so on. I beg to disagree. I think that the European Union, and you just mentioned this, has actually agreed on financial support for healthcare, but also for the economies of Southern European countries or countries in need in more general. And the compromise that was reached is a compromise that in the end all countries supported, including the Netherlands and Germany opposing Eurobonds. The problem with Eurobonds, as I see it, is it has become a buzzword for the North has to help the South. But there is no real mechanism how we issue these bonds. However, what we see now as Corona bonds, money from the European Stability Mechanism is being used. You can use money from the budget of the European Union structural funds and rededicate it. One of the controversial issues that has not been solved is the question, are these going to be loans the countries are going to pay back, or are they subsidies the countries will receive and can keep so that the money is spent? That is the big issue, and that has not been resolved. But definitely the European Union has done several things, including insisting on open borders as soon as possible to reopen the borders for the mobility, the four mobilities. So I do think that, and I'm convinced that the British exit from the European Union, the negotiations are still ongoing, has kind of been put on the back burner because we have so many other issues to deal with, but that we will actually also have to kind of restructure relations within the European Union. But I think the situation is better than some of the commentators have argued during the last couple of weeks.
Claus, you mentioned there's no going back to December 2019. And one of the things that are going to change is, I'm paraphrasing, this is the end of neoliberalism, we're bringing the state back in. And yet, the way in which the state is being brought back in is more Habermasian than Schmittian, right? It's a deliberation, it's a rational discourse. We're using science and in order to discuss in a democratic forum what is the best way forward. So this is not, as you said, it may be the hour of the executive, but we don't see democratic backsliding. This is a very optimistic way of taking stock. Are there cracks in this perfect Habermasian in this perfectly Habermasian civilized Federal Republic of Germany? Is there anything else?
Yeah, sure. We were already mentioning the AfD, and they have their right-wing intellectuals since years now, and they are propagating a different kind of democracy, a plebiscitarian democracy, where they say, das Volk steht über dem Recht, the people are more interesting than the state of law, etc. So this is still there, and but on the other hand, they have nothing to say. This is the most interesting development right now, that other than in Brazil or in the United States, these people are kind of mute, because they are muted because everybody sees, or at least 80% of the population realize that they have nothing to say. They're absolutely, they have no function in the political system in terms of, haha, here is a problem and we are dealing with it, like the Green Party 30 years, 40 years ago. So I think they're kind of superfluous. And this is not true for the eastern part of Europe. As I said, they take opportunity, for example, in Hungary, to enlarge the authoritarian rule. And there is a heavy democratic backsliding. I just read the recent report of Freedom House saying that Hungary is now only partly free. So it has just 70 points of possible 100 points compared to Scandinavian states with 100 and Germany with 94 or so. So there is a difference, and democratic backsliding already took place in these states. The problem is, how do they relate to this European recovery program? It will be absolutely necessary for them. How much pressure is put onto these states by the European Commission? And how much do people in Poland and Hungary reflect the incompetence of these leaders in these countries too? There is no healthcare system available to the population at large. So this is the main question. And this kind of permanent campaigning that Trump is doing in the United States is not possible in parliamentary democracies, even not in Poland. And so there is still room for the opposition. But you are right, the Habermasian thing is a very optimistic view. Schmittian views are there. But I do not agree, for example, with Giorgio Agamben, who is now using the term of state of exception. He did this at several occasions, and we must be warned to use, the old concepts and frames for something that seems to be absolutely new, unprecedented, etc., etc. So we still have to be modestly find out what kind of crisis we're in. This is not a war, as Macron or Elizabeth II said. This is not a normal catastrophe like an earthquake, like the big one, like tsunami, like Fukushima, like Chernobyl. This is not the Great Depression again. So it's something different. And we have to find out, we have to analyze very carefully. And I think it's too much stressing the authoritarian issue, and the issue of authoritarianism and the state of exception is a bit a deviation from what we as social scientists would have to do right now.
Mm-hmm. Christiana, I would like to ask you about the future of transatlantic relations and how they will be impacted by the current situation, if at all. Already before the virus hit, those relations were under stress, especially from the American side, but also in parts from the European side. Now, there are a lot of severed ties, at least for the time being. The exchange has gone down. Simply physical in people, fewer people flying back and forth. Do you think we will be seeing any long-term consequences of what we are witnessing now, or will this just go away once we have, I don't know, a vaccine?
No, I mean, first of all, the troubles in transatlantic relations have been going on for the past couple of years. This is not new, but in my research, I found, that even though the rhetoric on the governmental level is so confrontational, transatlantic relations are very strong and relying on and building on a very dense network, not only of institutions or universities, but also of people going back and forth, of people who are collaborating and working together, NGOs and so on. That I argued, earlier on that transatlantic relations are better than the reputation and the rhetoric. But having said this, what we see right now is that it is not possible, like you say, to travel, to maintain these close ties. We all had to go back into our little corner. The American students were called back. You know, they went back to the US, the students who were here in Germany, in Europe in general, in European studies programs. And the Germans were called back from the United States. And so there is a disentanglement, really, I would say. The question is, how long will this state of exception last? I think time horizon until the end of this year with no travel. I don't get a visa for the United States to come back in fall, even though I'm invited. My university in North Carolina cannot issue an invitation. I will not get a visa before 2021. And the same is true for many other scholars, for our graduate students, and so on. So if this continues into 2021, I think we have a serious problem. I think we should do everything to maintain the close ties. Right now, we still have a generation that is very open towards each other. And we have funding, we have scholarships, including the DAAD. And so I think if we kind of deliberately restart, you know, these very close relations we had a year ago, then I think we're in good shape. The other interesting question, of course, is who will be in the White House in January 2021. And I think a lot depends on that. I do see two totally opposite directions emerging. And one is so, how shall I put it? I mean, we really have to worry about the transatlantic relationship on many levels. But here in Europe, we can clearly say that the reputation of the United States is so low right now of the official policy that strengthening the EU, strengthening, Europe could include moving away from the United States, which I think would be wrong, and it would be it would really cause more problems than it would solve issues. One aspect that has been discussed in Germany is the role of China. There is this charm offensive coming out of China. We send you masks, we send you support. But I do think that there are many people here who are very skeptical because it's a completely different political system, and you need transparency in this situation more than anything else. So, but the ground is shifting, is changing, and the political actors will play a major role in the next couple of months, and in particularly in the next year.
Thank you very much, Christiane and Claus. I would now like to open it to the audience. If you can type in the Q&A box, and I will then call on you, and you could either ask your question live, or I will read it. The first question that I see is from Yasmin Pamuk. I will now try and go live with her question. Yasmin, can you hear us? Can you hear me? Okay, I'm probably doing something wrong, so I will just read the question. On the dark side of transatlantic relations, to what extent is there a growing strategic transatlantic cooperation among populist authoritarian groups on both sides of the Atlantic? Does Corona enhance or inhibit this? Can either of you answer that?
Well, there was the Steve Bannon offensive traveling to Italy a couple of years ago, and calling for a new right movement, which that was before the European parliamentary elections last year, and it actually did not work very well. I don't think that the American right and the European right share the same kind of, they might share the same strategic goals, but in terms of issues, in terms of the context of they operate in, that cooperation did not work very well. In the current crisis, I see that some of the protests against government policy in Germany resonates from what is being discussed in the US on the right, and some of the Free Michigan or whatever demonstrations in the US. You see similar demonstrations here in Berlin, against government policies of social distancing and so on. And I think that some, fringe groups on the right feel emboldened by what they see in the US, including, by the way, buying weapons, stocking up in supplies in terms of ammunition and weapons. But it's a fringe, these are very small groups demonstrating, fringe groups in Germany. Of course, social media and the internet allows these groups to closer cooperate. But I'm not so much concerned about the US-European connection as I am about the European connection, if you want, what is happening in European rightist movements and parties, that including the backsliding in Hungary and Poland and other countries. I mean, that is probably what we need to be concerned about here in Germany and in Europe more than this transatlantic cooperation.
Thank you.
I think what we have, excuse me, just one word, what we have is a kind of ideological convergence in terms of racism and white supremacism. This is very relevant now in Germany, and even if they are fringe people, particularly the preppers you were talking about, there is massive attacks. We had like 2,500 people killed by the right wing in Germany since the early 90s. This is not it's not to forget. And I think there is you're right, there is a divergence in terms of America first and Germany, France, etc. first. But on the other hand, there is a common ideological ground in terms of anti-Semitism, racism, and white supremacism. This was rather new for Europe to have this coming back, the white man's burden, and all this stuff about the population exchange is now a meme, a framework, a very strong thing for the right. And this also is a bit reflected in the center of the societies.
Right.
I have a question from Peter Rosenbaum. I will read it. It seems that Corona is a preview of the impact of climate change on our lives. Claus, you alluded to that a little bit. Do you think that we actually need some of the tools and regulations currently in place to fight climate change?
No, the opposite is true, if I may say so. I think the Corona crisis gives us a hint how much we are depending on what we call nature. The nature system, in a way, strikes back, and it does in form of pandemia, it does in form of climate change, it does in form of biological diversity, etc., etc. So we are in the same realm. That's true, but the measures to be taken are completely different. Pandemia means full stop, means lockdown, shutdown, total break. Whereas climate protection enhances a kind of, we have to go full speed. We have like 10 years for avoiding the 3 or 4 or 5 degrees world. So not with authoritarian rules. This is just a thing for a persuasive politics. It's not about state regulation. It's very much about economic Anreize, economic incentives. Thank you. It's very much about investment. It's about divestment from carbon emissions, etc. So the pattern is completely the opposite. There is no eco-dictatorship available to solve the climate crisis. You can only do this with a consensus in the general population. And by the way, it's given. It's even in the United States, the majority of people is in favor of climate protection, is in favor of environmental issues. There are differences in the political cultures, but the problem is the government. And as we were talking about transatlantic relations, I would say that the re-election of Donald Trump is, in a way, a very disruptive continuation of an estrangement between the two sides of the Atlantic. And that's why we have to focus on city networks or on state or cooperation on the state level. For example, California with European states, or even on the city level. So what my friend Ben Barber argued when he wrote his book, If Mayors Ruled the World. I think city networks on the basis of strong networks between the cities, including digital relations, this is a way to find a new basis also for transatlantic and transnational relations now.
And I have a question from Brian Gately. He raised his hand. Brian, I will open your mic and you can ask your question now.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah.
But do you think it was a good idea for Europe, the Schengen Europe, to close their borders to each other? In other words, here in the United States, it would be almost unthinkable. I mean, okay, I live in New York City, and maybe Texas wanted to make me go into quarantine if I went down there. And so there was some of that up in the United States. But since the European Union is a union, was it such a good idea to close the border so you couldn't even go from France to Germany?
Well, look, the way it happened was that the concentration of corona cases in Italy was the starting point. And the spreading of the virus into other countries and tracing the spreading of the virus is still important. We need to know, how this virus moves to be able to fight it. Otherwise, you will keep everybody in a lockdown position. So I do think that you need measures to control this, the flow. With people, and it comes with people traveling from Italy, coming back from their skiing vacation to Germany, and so on. So the policy to control the borders and even close them at that point in time was right. It could have been communicated better. And it was not right that each country said, we will keep our own medical equipment. You cannot export any masks, for example, or protective gear to another country. That was probably too much. But in terms of tracing, nobody had an app at that point in time. We're now talking about apps where you can kind of follow people who are infected and see, who is infected by them. So that measure, to a certain extent, was prudent, and it was not a nationalistic impulse to say, well, we just build borders, but it was an attempt to somehow get a handle on the spreading of the virus. Now we're in a situation where we are discussing in Europe what kind of flow of people across the border, but also goods, is feasible. Does not put harm on the population. And that's, there's a tension here. You don't want to harm the population. And at the same time, you don't want to harm this idea of it is one Europe with open borders, which is something Europeans treasure, and especially the younger generation really enjoys the open border situation, but it's just right now not the wisest thing to do. We have student exchange programs from Erasmus across the border, and unfortunately we had to halt them, hoping that in the next months we would have some kind of immunization, we would have some better medication, we would have some better tracing features and so on. So it's not a permanent thing. I think that is very clear. It's not a permanent thing. It's not a goal that countries pursue, but it's a measure. And actually, in some borders now are slowly being reopened. Denmark and Germany, for example, Poland and Germany in terms of the flow of goods, and so on and so on. From an abstract level, yes, it is wrong to close borders, period, in a community of 17. But at the same time, you need policies to stop the spread of the virus.
I have a question from Hadass Aron. I will read it. On the one hand, as you noted, this is a moment in which the state in Germany is strong and anti-establishment is discredited, at least in the West. On the other hand, there is an emerging economic recession and European cleavages that have previously been translated to domestic cleavages in Germany. Without asking you to predict the future, can you weigh a bit on how you see these contradicting trends playing out? And what about Merkel and the next elections? So please predict the future.
Well, Merkel is an interesting figure because she almost disappeared from the, decision-making center of politics. She wanted to kind of hand on her legacy to the successor. She was kind of withdrawing. And now the opposite is true. I mean, she's the woman of the hour, and she's the prudent and smart Dr. Merkel scientist person who is very strong. She's not going to run again next year. I mean, she will not run for the chancellorship again. She has said that, and I do believe that she will stick to that. So it is very interesting to see who of all the men now fighting, Söder and Laschet and you name them, who is going to come out to be the chancellor candidate for the CDU-CSU. And of course, they have different policies and so on. So in terms of Merkel, I think that she's doing what she's best at a moment in time where she is needed, and she takes the responsibility, but only for the moment. It's a coalition government. The Social Democrats are not doing bad either. I mean, several of their politicians, Olaf Scholz and others, were very visible. And so the Grand Coalition right now is stable. I do think that by next year, we will have a much more differentiated political landscape with the Greens have, strong standing. The Free Democrats are trying to show face, even though their agenda is very limited. The AfD is there to stay. And so we will have, again, a very difficult coalition forming situation. Yeah.
Claus, any thoughts on the second part of that question, the cleavage in the emerging or upcoming recession?
Well, that's hard to predict. I think the recession will be very severe, and I think this is a kind of depression we're going into, and so I have no clue how this can be solved. I think there is a lot of money on the table right now, and I think we have to transform it into a kind of future-based investment for environmental reform, etc. If this happens, then the recovery program makes sense. If not, it's just back to the old normality, which will not work any longer, because nobody thinks that tourism, that extreme mobility we have, will simply continue as before 2020. The interesting point is here, in terms of cleavages, is of course that we had this left-wing cleavage for a long time, the Social Democrats versus the Christian Democrats, or the conservatives against the progressive, and this was fading away in a way, and there was some signs of being substituted by a cleavage between the Greens and let's call them the blue or the browns, so the right wing. So this could have happened if this pandemia would not have happened. Now we are kind of back to the old game. There is a grand coalition between the major parties. I don't know how this will work out. At least I should say that our American friends should keep in mind two names of the Green Party when we're talking about next chancellors. Maybe not in the near future, but maybe we will hear about two guys, Mrs. Baerbock and Mr. Habeck. This is the names that have to be noted because they were very close. They doubled the Social Democrats and were almost close to the level of the Christian Democrats. So they are still in the game, and it will work out next year or 2022.
Janis had asked a question early on. Have Germany's marginalized communities been hit more from COVID-19, as it is the case in the US, where, as we know, especially African Americans are disproportionately affected by the virus and its consequences? Do we know anything similar from or about Germany? Do you have any data?
No, not that I know of. I mean, what are marginalized communities? I mean, the refugees in Germany are very much distributed now in different, locations. It's not the situation like on the Greek islands where you have huge refugee camps, overcrowded, very, very bad health situation. That is a source of deep concern. But the situation in Germany is very different. I do not think that the Turkish German community or the Arab German community is hit harder. Ramadan is of course a challenge because that's a family feast, but from what I've seen and heard and observed, everybody is actually pretty much following the rules, and they have the same access to healthcare as everybody else. I think the access issue to healthcare is very important. Of course, the health status of people, the preconditions they have varies in different groups. And that's part of the American problem, that African Americans already have a number of preconditions, have always had issues before Corona, and now they are hard hit because all of this kind of heightens the bad situation. But no, I am not aware of any data, and from observation from newspaper reports, that is not a concern. Klaus, you may correct me. I don't know.
No, I think that we have no data, and there is some suspicion about it, that there might be a serious situation in some places where refugees are concentrated, etc. But in general, we don't have this problem in Germany.
I have a question from Ben Bergen. How useful has the World Health Organization been in helping Germany take appropriate actions?
Well, the WHO has been very important in terms of the research. You may have heard that a German company, BioNTech, is now starting clinical trials for immunization on humans. against COVID-19. And this research was not just conducted by the company, but there was an international network of scholars working on this for quite some time, building on the communication they already had with the World Health Organization and researchers in other countries, because this all builds on the SARS and other very serious infections and crises. And so in that sense, the WHO has played a role. And beyond that, no, I mean, since our healthcare system has the means and the supplies and so on, we do not receive direct aid. There is a debate that, there's a lot of concern about African countries, about other parts of the world where you don't have healthcare systems that work. And if there is a pandemic, then, you just need international support. But here in this country, the support is more in terms of the research scholar networks.
Mm-hmm. I think we have time for one more question. It says, am I young, but it's signed Tomasz Marcondes, and it also says, hello, Christiane, former student here. The question is, to what extent have you observed the far right leveraging the crisis to inflate anti-immigrant sentiments in Germany? And if so, how much traction has that strategy received in contrast to the US experience?
I mean, the far right has always driven the agenda on anti-immigration sentiments. I mean, that was their topic number one. That's how they influenced the political discourse in Germany: anti-immigration, anti-immigrants, anti-refugees. We talked about, the rise of the white supremacy notion, Germans only. Right now, the far right has a problem with that argument, because from what we know, the virus came not with immigrants. On the contrary, it came with fairly normal people traveling to other European countries, or to China, or to the US, or wherever. And these are usually not, the immigrants. I'm certain that the AfD and the far right will try to use this argument, and may use it in social media, but in the public discourse, the argument would not, be taken seriously, because it's simply not true, obviously not true.
Claus, do you have one last thought on that?
Yeah, I just wanted to mention that the degree of paranoid politics, particularly in the social media, is quite high, also in Germany. And I think what we can say and state is that this pandemic may strengthen the paranoid style of politics, as Hofstadter once said. And I think this is at least true. And the AfD is now split into two fractions. There is this conservative wing trying to be reasonable now and to be constructive in this crisis, and there is still the so-called Flügel, the right wing, the far right wing, which is of course on the brink of breaking apart from the AfD and constituting a kind of very far right politics in Germany. But as I said, particularly in West Germany, this is now very restricted.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Christiane. Thank you, Claus. Thank you to all the participants in this virtual panel discussion. This concludes our webinar. I hope to see everybody real soon in person at Deutsches Haus with a glass of wine after we are done debating the issues of the day. Unfortunately, this is not possible today, but I think, for starters, This was a good one. Thank you all very much. Good night.
Good night.
Thank you.